Welcome everybody to the Housing Commission's October 6, 2021 regular meeting. This is a teleconference meeting with Housing Commission members, city staff, and members of the public participating remotely to ensure proper social distancing in this federal, state, and local emergency. I will call the meeting to order at 6:34 p.m. And I would like to start by introducing staff and Housing Commission members present. Commissioner Lauren Bigelow.
Hello.
Myself, Karen Grove, Commissioner Horst, Vice Chair Horst, sorry. Commissioner Leach, Heather Leach, Commissioner Nevada Merriman.
Hi. Commissioner
Chelsea Nguyen, who is here, just stepped away for a moment, I guess. There she is. And Commissioner John Pimentel. And on staff,
Chelsea, we didn't hear any of that because you were still muted.
Oh, sorry. I had to turn walk away to turn on the light because it was too dark in the room.
Good. We're glad we can see you now. And on staff, we have Acting Housing Manager Mike Noche. So Mike, could you please provide instructions to the Housing Commission and members of the public on how the meeting will proceed?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Madam Chair. And members of the Housing Commission, welcome everyone to the October 6th meeting of the Housing Commission. At this time, we ask that members of the Housing Commission please remain on screen for the duration of the meeting. You will control your own webcams and microphones. Staff will engage cameras and microphones to make presentations and respond to members of the Housing Commission. For members of the public who are in attendance and wish to provide public comment after the chair calls for public comment on the item you wish to speak on, please engage the raised hand feature, or via telephone, please use *9 to raise your hand to speak. I will then have the ability to open your microphone and you can provide your public comment to the Housing Commission. That concludes my instructions and I'll return the meeting to the chair. Thank you.
Okay. If Zoom is correct, we wore people out on Monday because there are no participants, but under public comment, the public may address the Housing Commission on any subject not listed on the agenda. Each speaker may address the Housing Commission once under public comment for a limit of 3 minutes. Please clearly state your name and address or political jurisdiction in which you live. The Housing Commission cannot act on items not listed on the agenda, and therefore the Housing Commission cannot respond to non-agenda issues brought up under public comment other than to provide general information. Mike Noche, do we have any public comment?
So we do, and we actually have 5 attendees at the moment.
Oh, why did I not see them? Oh, I'm so sorry. Welcome, attendees.
So I didn't want anyone to feel worried that they weren't logged in properly.
Okay.
And it does look like we have 1 hand raised, but for anyone who just joined, I just wanted to remind those in attendance and anyone who wishes to, excuse me, to provide public comment, please use the raised hand feature or *9 if you are dialing in. I will then have the ability to open your microphone. And one moment while I get our timer ready. And our first public commenter will be Pam Jones. And Pam, you should be able to unmute.
Yes, good evening. Pam Jones, resident of Menlo Park. I wanted to clarify that the email that I sent to you all earlier was more about increasing awareness. There was a lot of information requested, so I don't expect it to happen tomorrow or the next day. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. And do we have another public comment, Mike?
One moment, Madam Chair. And for anyone who's just joined, please use the raised hand feature now to provide your public comment. And I do not see any additional public comments. I did want to mention that I will be adding Ms. Jones' email to the official minutes for this meeting, so it will be attached for future reference.
Great. Okay, under regular business, the Housing Commission receives informational presentations in addition to considering policy matters and administrative actions. Are there any clarifying questions from the Housing Commission on item D1? Approve minutes from the Housing Commission meeting of September 1st, 2021 before taking public comment on the item. Commissioner Nguyen.
Hi, Commissioner Chairwoman. I review it and I did not know, but I made a mistake on my vote regarding the Beltramo proposal.
Mhm.
And it's supposed to be an absolute no, but I guess I had said abstain. Is it possible to change to an abs? I mean, I know that it won't make a difference at all of the outcome,
Mhm.
but I wanted to set the record straight. It's an absolute no and not abstain. Is it possible to change that?
I will refer to Mike Noche on that question.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Nguyen. I'd be happy to follow up with you after the meeting. I don't know that that is possible, but I can confirm with the city clerk and if needed with the city attorney's office and get back to you.
Yes,
So
and I like I said, it wouldn't make a difference at all, the result of the outcome of the vote, but I just want to make it very clear my position on that particular issue. That is an absolute no. There is no abstain, there's no yes, it's absolutely no. And I guess I just wanted to put on record that's the case. I think I was doing math in my head. And I wasn't, thinking clearly, but anyway, there was a lot of math I had to do when they gave me the answer. And so, yeah, I'm sorry about that. Thank
Okay,
you, Mike.
well, hopefully we can make it right. So
I just want to make sure that the record, the public record, to show that I, yes, absolutely, no, thank you.
Understood. And if I may, through the chair,
Mhm.
I'll be sure to, I'll make a note on my end regarding the minutes that'll be approved. But if it's okay with the chair, if I'm able to make that change, I'll make that change on the minutes if that's part of the
Yeah.
motion.
So, but to be clear, Commissioner Nguyen, you agree that you abstained, but you meant to say no, correct?
That's right,
Okay.
yes. And I know that it wouldn't make a difference in terms of the
Yeah.
votes because everybody had voted yes. But
Mhm.
I think that for my conscience, that for the record moving
Mhm.
forward, that I absolutely want to be an absolute no. Yes,
Okay,
about that. Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
all right. Okay, so do I have a motion or any other discussion on the minutes? Oh, I think we need to take public comment.
Would you like me to take public comment,
Yeah,
Madam Chair? Okay.
yes,
Thank you.
please.
Absolutely. For members of the public who are in attendance and wish to provide public comment on item D1, the minutes for September 1st, 2021, please use the raised hand feature now, and I will be able to open your microphone. And I do not see any public comment on this item, so I'll return the meeting to the chair.
Okay, then I will entertain a motion in a second to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Thank you.
I can second.
And okay, great. So taking let me just jot this down. Roll call vote. Starting with Commissioner Bigelow.
I abstain. I wasn't her.
Oh, you were not. Commissioner Leach. You didn't watch the video afterwards, after your vacation?
After her birthday? Yes.
All right. Commissioner Merriman,
Yes.
Commissioner Nguyen.
I can't say yes because I'm still waiting, to hear what the outcome would be, but I guess in this case it'd be abstain. I can't make a vote either way because I'm hoping that Mike could change it.
Yeah, okay. All right, you abstain. Commissioner Pimentel,
Aye.
Commissioner Horst,
Aye.
and I say yes. Okay, the motion passes with 5 votes. and 2 abstentions. All right. So for item D2, we have a presentation by the BMR Ad Hoc Subcommittee on potential modifications to the required contribution of inclusionary units for residential development projects and changes to the housing program preferences. Mike Noche will provide a brief introduction, followed by a presentation by members of the BMR Ad Hoc Subcommittee. So I guess we're ready for our presentation.
All right, and I'll go ahead and give a brief introduction. I just wanted to double check with the chair. Will you be sharing your screen to present, or was that something you'd like me to display on the group's behalf?
Appreciate very much if you could share the presentation, but if you would like me to do it, I can.
I have the ability to, so I'm happy
Okay.
to do so.
Great.
If that's easier for everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
One moment. My computer begins to freeze a little bit as I offered. All right, so you should be able to see the presentation, and I should be able to make it full screen. Okay, so it should be full screen on everyone's display. Is that right?
Yes.
Great.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'll provide a very quick introduction, and I'll hand it off to the BMR Ad Hoc Subcommittee. A couple items I wanted to mention is that this is really the process that the subcommittee is going through is really meant to inform the Housing Commission and staff with options that will potentially help us with regards to future recommendations regarding the BMR guidelines. There's no actions being taken this evening, but all of the information that is shared is definitely for the Housing Commission's consideration. And there will be a discussion, which I know the subcommittee will guide everyone through. This is not the only time that the commission will weigh in on the BMR guidelines and the items being discussed this evening. And staff just wanted to reiterate that I appreciate hearing feedback from all of the commissioners present, if possible, and you feel comfortable providing and participating in the discussion. I also wanted to thank the subcommittee for all of their hard work that has gone into the preparation for the presentation. And with that, I will hand it off to the subcommittee.
All right, and Lauren is going to kick us off.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for being here tonight. I know it has been a week full of housing, which is a joy and a delight, but also a lot of work. So essentially what we wanted to do tonight, and Mike, could you go next slide, please, was to update you guys on what we have been working on, which, let me back up. The BMR Ad Hoc Subcommittee is comprised of Vice Chair Horst, Chair Grove, and myself, because any more than 3 people and we get into trouble with Brown Act stuff. And so because we all haven't been on the Housing Commission for the same amount of time, and this is the only current subcommittee that's running, it felt important to get everybody kind of talking about the same things. So we've been meeting for a little bit, and we had a massive list that we went through with you guys that had about 33 items on it that we wanted to go through. And thought all of them were very important, but we realized that at some point we have to prioritize some of our work. And so we decided on 3 separate and distinct policies that we wanted to work on and take forward to council to move with quickly. But we also wanted to hear your feedback and thoughts on these things, because clearly the work of a subcommittee cannot take things forward to the council itself. We need to, as a commission, take things forward. And your thoughts are really important to us as well. So those three things were the BMR preferences. And by that, I mean the things that people select when they apply for housing with us, and the rate at which they move through a waiting list. BMR below market rate ownership inclusionary requirements, and below market rate rental inclusionary requirements. And so we'll all take a little piece of these things, and I will kind of help tie us all together in the end and facilitate some of the discussion. But first, Karen is going to take on discussion about the BMR preferences, and then Rachel will take on the inclusionary requirements for ownership and rental units. Mike, next slide, please. Okay, so as I mentioned, we've talked about the list and the narrowing it down. There was a little bit of a delay just because we've had a bit of changing of the guard on staff, which congratulations, acting housing manager. But we're still moving forward and trying to take these things forward to council expeditiously, because they all concern opportunities that could be missed with regard to BMR housing. And with that, I will turn it over to Karen at the next slide to talk about the BMR preferences. Next slide.
Next slide. Yes. Okay. So just, I think the easiest way to talk about this is the way things are today and the way we're proposing to change them to. Anyway, so today the status quo is if there's a BMR unit available and there are people on an interest list, to be in the first draw of the lottery, you need to fit into this set of preferences. And the preferences are you either live or work in Menlo Park, or you were displaced from Menlo Park in 2008. So just to go into each of those, if you live in Menlo Park, you don't necessarily need to live in a home or a house or an apartment. You can be an unhoused resident of Menlo Park. Still counts that you live in Menlo Park if you live in Menlo Park. So the Housing Commission made that adjustment about 3-4 years ago when I first joined, and thankfully that's done. The work requirement is that you work at least 20 hours in Menlo Park. So if you're a gardener and you work 20 hours in Menlo Park, you work in Menlo Park. And then the displaced thing, I'll just explain that we tried to write this. We intended at the time that we put this in, also about 3-4 years ago, to include under the live, or just live, work, or displaced, anyone displaced in 2008 or anytime since. But there was an error in the way it was written. We tried to change it on the fly, but we're told we couldn't do that because it hadn't been noticed. So for 3 years, we've had this very strange preference. So what we're proposing, I'll start at the bottom, is to fix that displaced error. So everything's the same. I'll get to number 1 in a minute. Everything's the same, except that if you were displaced anytime since January 1st of 2008, and then we added if you previously had lived in Menlo Park for at least 3 years, then you qualify for the live, work, or displaced preference. And we inserted above that, anyone who is a bona fide wheelchair user, if there is an accessible BMR unit available, then they get it, because there are so few BMR units available for people who require a wheelchair. So next slide, please. We have done some public input or gathered some public input on these preferences, and we have reached out to 5 longtime Bellhaven residents because we wanted to get input, especially on the displaced requirement. We talked about changing it to displaced anytime in the last 3 years because 2008 feels like a very long time ago. However, I think everyone that I talked to knows somebody, almost everyone, told me that they know someone who used to live in Bellhaven, was displaced, still works, not in Menlo Park, but maybe Stanford or somewhere really close, and would like to come back. So they felt strongly it should remain. And so that's why it's still in our proposal. There was strong support for inserting the bona fide wheelchair users in the preferences. One person suggested that we put work after live or displaced, thinking that the work requirement at the higher income levels could mix in people who are sort of new to the community and maybe have caused some of the displacement. Another person said that didn't make sense because we're talking about lower income level people. So I'm just putting that there as it was input. And then the other piece of valuable input was a request that we make sure that people who have rented a room and maybe don't have a formal contract or lease, or they work informal jobs, but more than 20 hours, that they can qualify for this as well. So that is, I think, I don't know if anybody talked to, we intended to reach out to Samaritan House, CLESPA, and Legal Aid. And I reached out to Nuestra Casa, but didn't get anything back. Commissioner Horst was going to do some outreach, and I did not follow up before the meeting to ask if we got any feedback.
We
So
did
I'll ask her now.
feedback, from CLESPA, and it aligned largely with what you just said.
Okay. All right.
Except for the very last part of what you said, but all of the other recommendations lined up with exactly.
Okay. All right. What is our next slide? I think maybe, okay, that's it. So we can go back to the changes and, oh no, we're not going to have any. All right. So I'm just going to pause. Write yourself a little note if you have a question or comment, because we have a lot to cover. So sorry, Commissioner Nguyen, we're going to go to public after the presentation. We'll have public comment, and then we'll have discussion question among us. Okay, so next, I will pass it on to, no, I'm going to do the ownership. So next one. Okay, so we have some problems with our inclusionary guidelines for ownership units. One is that we don't specify whether the ownership unit should be affordable to moderate income people, low income people, very low, whatever. So I believe we have about, I didn't verify this exactly, but something around 68 BMR ownership units in Menlo Park, and all but one were affordable for purchase at moderate income, not low income. Only one is affordable at low income. Meanwhile, on our legacy wait list, the one that has quite a few people on it, we have people who are very low, and I think even somebody who's extremely low income. So that's a problem. Another problem is that, as you'll see on the next slide, we have a tiered percentage requirement. So if you build only 4 units, you don't have to provide any BMR units. If you build a 5th unit, then you do have to provide a unit. So that seems to us like a disincentive to go from 4 to 5 units. So we decided we would like to change that as well. So the status quo is on the left. There's no requirement of affordability level, and we have this tiered percentage. What we're proposing is no tiers. So even if you, this is something we definitely would like feedback on, even if you build a single residence, you have a 15% below market rate affordable unit requirement. Clearly, that is, you can't build 0.15 of a house, so you would pay 0.15 of the in lieu fee. Once you get to the point where you would build 1 unit, it must be affordable to low income people. And if you get to the point where you owe 1.5 units, you provide 1 unit and half of the fee. When you get to the point that you can provide 2 units, you provide 1 low income and 1 moderate, and then goes from there. if it's 3 units, then it's 2 low income and 1 moderate. If it's 4 units, it's equal numbers of each. So I hope that's clear. We can't take questions at this point in time. But again, I'll like pause for a minute so people can write down their questions so they can remember them later.
And just to interrupt really quickly, I wanted to let the public know and other commissioners know that we did post the slides to the agenda so that people could view them if they wanted to go along with this process, or if they had something they wanted to pull up on their own slide and write a note about a question that they had specific to that slide, just to make things easier, because we know it's a lot of information right now. But to make public comment easier, we have to go through everything here first, take public comment, and then have the discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you for the interruption.
Thank you, Lauren. Okay, I think that concludes the ownership proposal. And I think I'd pass it on to, oh no, I did. We have one more slide. So maybe we want to pause here a little bit. This is the side-by-side comparison. And it has what I just said out loud. It has the example of how many units. Is that right? I feel like this is a little repetitive with the last slide. Anyway.
It's everything that you just said, basically.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yes. Okay, so I think we can move on. Rachel.
All right, rental. So there are also challenges associated with the rental portion of the inclusionary guidelines, but we would like to call them out specific to the needs in the community for below market rate rentals. So as we have here, the leading cause of homelessness, which is a problem in every community, including Menlo Park, is a lack of affordable housing. And in addition, people who are homeless are disproportionately Black and disabled. You can see the percentages there, and these are taken from the sources are listed below, CalMatters and Bay Area Equity Alliance. And also incomes, of course, and income inequality really fuels these disproportionate impacts. You can see the difference. White full-time workers earning $152,546 compared to Latinx full-time workers earning $43,255, and Black full-time workers at $41,333. So the bottom line of this is that the lack of affordable housing is really affecting disproportionately our communities of color, and that extremely low and very low income affordability is what is needed by more than half of those residents. And when we say extremely low and very low income, we're talking about housing that is affordable to those income levels. ELI and VLI housing, as we refer to them, that tracks with 30% of the area median income and 50% of the area median income. Next slide. So now looking at our guidelines and what challenges we found from, well, the results that we've seen as housing commissioners as we see projects come through and that have a BMR requirement. Currently, for 20 or more units, we have a 15% inclusionary requirement, but we require those units to be affordable at low income or an equivalent mix. So we run into a similar challenge as with the ownership units. There's a lack of specificity and a lack of clarity. And oftentimes that does result in too few very low income units. We tend to get higher income targeting in these projects. We have more projects in the pipeline, as Lauren pointed out. And SB 330, for example, streamlining laws really limit the ability to review alternatives because of the limited amount of discretionary review. These projects don't come through Housing Commission and Planning Commission multiple times. So we have to get it right. It's very time sensitive in that sense. And just to sum it up, 11 BMR units needed for everyone that exists in our community right now. And the greatest need is at the deepest levels of affordability. So we try to address this by in our suggestions to the inclusionary housing requirement for rental. It is not abstract. We had projects like 1300 and 500 El Camino Real, where we view those as missed opportunities because those were projects that were permitted prior to the inclusionary ordinance applying to rentals. That was a state issue. That wasn't just in the city of Menlo Park, but we very much know that we need to take advantage of these projects that are in our pipeline. Next slide, please. To the proposal. So this, just like the ownership, it shows the current requirement as it is provided in the BMR guidelines, and then our proposed requirement. So again, we're looking at a tiered percentage requirement, meaning that the more units there are, the more the requirement increases. So as you can see, it's not until that 20 or more units that the 50% kicks in. For 10 to 19 units, it's 10%. There's nothing for 1 to 4 units. And then there's the 1 unit required for the 5 to 9. Fractional units are paid into the BMR fund, or you can route it to the next unit. And again, we're running into the lack of specificity with the all low income or equivalent mix. So VLI, LI, or mod leads to oftentimes a combination that is not very deeply affordable. So our proposal attempts to correct for this. So again, there's a fixed percentage requirement. There are no tiers, 15% across the board. Fractional units, same as before, paid into the BMR fund or routed up to the nearest unit. Then we are proposing 3 options or sub options, if you will, within the inclusionary rental category. There would be a 15% inclusionary requirement, and there's a slide for each of these. So this is just to introduce the three options. A 15% inclusionary requirement broken down into 1/3 VLI, 1/3 LI, and 1/3 moderate. And again, the VLI, LI, and mod tracking with a 50% AMI, 80% AMI, and 120% AMI. The second option, option B, would be a 10% inclusionary requirement, but with lower affordability, deeper affordability. 1/3 ELI, 1/3 VLI, and 1/3 LI. And then option C is a 25% inclusionary requirement, but with a financially comparable, as we're calling it, land donation. And I will expound upon that when we get to that slide. So next slide, please. Option A, 15% with the VLI, LI, mod, or MI combination. So you see here how this would play out with a project based on its size. It's 15% across the board, but it's not until you get to the 7 units that you actually owe a unit. And as Karen described, it's the same concept as with the ownership units. Once you actually owe a full unit, it's a fee up until that point for the fractional unit. Once one unit is owed, that unit comes in at low income level. And then up until there is a second unit required. That's here we are at the 13 to 19 units at the size. Then 1 VLI unit, which would mean that if there's 2 units required, there has to be 1 VLI and 1 LI. And then there's a fractional fee until there are 3 units required. And at that point, we're at 20 to 26. Then we have all 3 income categories, VLI, LI, and moderate income, and so on and so forth. So the important concept here being that when there is only 1 unit required, that first unit comes in at low income, then VLI, and then all 3. Okay, next slide. So option B, same concept, but with a 10% inclusionary requirement across the board, and the affordability levels lower at ELI, so 30% AMI, VLI, and LI. So once again, once we hit the 1 unit threshold, that is to say 1 unit is required. So in this 10 to 19 units category, so I had 10 units, there would be 1 unit required. That first unit comes in at very low income level. Then when 2 units are required, ELI and VLI. And then finally, when 3 units are required, there's 1 of each. And for all fractional units, the fee kicks in. Okay, option C, next slide. Option C is a land, we're calling it land donation, but to be specific, this is actually a set aside of perhaps the same site as where the market rate project is. It can be at the same site if the site is large enough and accommodates it, or at a higher opportunity alternative location. And higher opportunity, we did not precisely define, I don't believe, as the ad hoc committee amongst ourselves, but high opportunity locations would be those that would be high opportunity in terms of access to amenities, that would score high on the opportunity, on the TCAC opportunity map. We would have definition we could draw from the state. In this case, the developer, the market rate developer, would have to partner with a nonprofit housing developer to develop that fully affordable project, either on a site or at the alternative high opportunity location. The unit mix would have to be deeply affordable, ELI, VLI, LI, or target people with certain special needs, so that the project will qualify for public funding, county, state, or federal funding, public subsidy. And then we are leaving this open, but basically determine based on what is fair, feasible, and attractive to encourage for-profit developers to partner with affordable housing providers to build that fully affordable, 100% affordable housing site, and to achieve deeper affordability. So we need to arrive at a percentage that makes sense to incentivize this result. But the thinking is that if the units are not integrated into the full development market rate mixed with the inclusionary units development, then the requirement increases. And it has to be for good reason, because it enables the project to leverage other outside funding sources and achieve deeper affordability and meet community needs. So that's the thinking there. I'm going to pass it over, next slide please, back to Lauren to lead discussion.
Absolutely. And when I say discussion, I'm actually going to put a pin in it and take public comment, and then we'll come back and have a discussion. So our slides lied to you right then. But Mike, I'm going to kick it to you.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Bigelow. And one moment while I navigating everything on my own this evening, so you'll just have to bear with me.
You're doing a great job.
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. Okay, so as a reminder for members of the public who are in attendance and wish to provide public comment, please engage the raised hand feature. If you are dialing in, please push *9. I will then have the ability to open your microphone and you will be able to provide your public comment to the Housing Commission. And it does look like we have at least one public commenter. So our first public commenter will be Jen Stokely. Jen, I will open your microphone. You should be able to address the commission.
Good evening, Housing Commission. I'm Jan Stokely, Executive Director of Housing Choices. I would love to be able to see that last slide while I talk, but first of all, Housing Choices focuses on the housing needs of people with developmental disabilities. And that's a part of the Menlo Park population that is really not served at all by the housing that's been produced so far in the city. And so it's really exciting to see the proposed change to the BMR rental to create an alternative for some extremely low income units as part of that framework. So I just want to speak very strongly in favor of that and applaud you for your creativity. We've been advocating for it in a number of jurisdictions for several years, and you guys are trying to make it happen. So that's exciting. I'm a little bit confused and don't quite understand how you would incentivize developers who donate land to go above and beyond what the property would already be used for, given all the typical state, federal, and county financing programs. It seems to me you really want to think about what's missing in Menlo Park and require that those 100% affordable units really target some of the underserved needs. And I'm thinking of people with developmental disabilities, but I know there are others as well. So I would just encourage you, these 100% affordable are going to be financed with a certain set of financing programs that don't necessarily include the most underserved populations in Menlo Park. So as you do the housing element and think about those needs, please try to strengthen the incentive for developers who do make the land donation to go above and beyond the typical affordable housing income targeting, and try to include populations that especially need to be targeted in Menlo Park. But overall, I'm excited. This is great. Thank you for all your hard work on this. It's good to see people pushing the envelope. Thanks.
Thank you, Jan. And our next, one moment, and our next public commenter will be Pam Jones. Pam, I will unmute your microphone. You should be able to address the commission now.
Yes, I can. Thank you. And I first really appreciate the work that the subcommittee has done, and it's very extensive. And I'm hopeful that we'll have a BMR program that really addresses all of the needs. To be consistent, I continually state we need to have 25% of BMRs. I looked at slide 11 and I thought to myself, well, let's, graduate it. So start at 15, go to 18, 22, and 25%. The reality is, if we have a funding system that prevents developers from offering affordable housing and integrated throughout their units, and they end up being required to have separate units that are all designed, whatever it is that you need to do for BMRs. It seems to me that we need to address the problem at that level. And I'm just putting it out there, not that you all can do that, but to think about that when you go back to particularly to your housing agencies. What is it that prevents us from building more BMRs? And it seems to me that we say, well, you have to incentivize the builders because they're very busy wanting to pencil in and out everything. But that may not really be where the problem lies. The other piece that I want to leave you with, and I'm consistent, and that is, I think we need to change the color of pencil so that we can address a very serious need that we have in San Mateo County, all of the United States, but really severe in Menlo Park. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. And we do have another commenter. One moment. And our next public comment will be from Randy Avalos. And Randy, you should be able to unmute your microphone and address the Housing Commission now.
Good evening, commissioners. Thank you for your work. Just a question regarding the accessibility of BMR units. And I know if there's any known quantities that are actually accessible, not only externally, but internally. When most of your rent's going just to pay for the place, making modifications for accessibility indoors becomes very difficult. So just a general question. Thank you for your work.
All right, one moment. I just wanted to send out one more reminder for members of the public who are in attendance and wish to provide public comment. Please use the raised hand feature now. And I do not see any additional public comments at the moment. So I will return the meeting to the BMR subcommittee, and I'll go ahead and bring that last slide up for you all.
Thank you so much, Mike. And thank you to Jan, Pam, and Randy for taking the time to be here and comment. We appreciate you. Okay, so there were a lot of points of discussion. Before we jump into this, it seems like, Chelsea, maybe you had a clarifying question, or was that answered in later slides?
Well, the question I have is, so actually, I need clarification that anyone who has been displaced, been forced to move out of Menlo Park in the last 3 years can come back, right? The reason I'm asking this is that I have a friend from church, from Menlo Church, an 80-year-old widow, 80-year-old. She was forced to move out. She couldn't afford to stay in her little apartment anymore. And my thing is, she would have, right now she has to drive an hour and a half to go to church every Sunday. And I'm just wondering, just clarify with me that she would be considered a displaced person and she can come back to Menlo Park and have one of these BMR units. Is that what you mean?
Go ahead.
I'll ask Mike to confirm this, but I believe if she lived in Menlo Park for more than 3 years, and from your story, it sounds like she was displaced after January 1st, 2008.
Yes.
So I believe she would have preference for a BMR unit that she income qualifies for. So if she's in the income range for a BMR unit, then she has preference along with.
Yeah, absolutely. She's on Social Security. I mean, she's 80 years old.
Yes.
She had lived there most of her life, until her husband passed away. This woman is like maybe 79, 80. So it's not like she's
Yeah.
I highly doubt if she can
Yeah,
afford.
Yes, and as you saw on an earlier slide, there are 11 people who need a BMR unit for every BMR unit that we have. So even having preference doesn't guarantee that you get the unit. I think it's typically a lottery, but
I know.
Yeah.
I know, because remember, I told you initially I was on the BMR list for 20 years.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I know how limited we have in terms of units and, opportunities. So
Okay.
no, I get it. I just want to be clear if I understood the word when you said displaced.
Yep.
If she's would be considered one of those people. Yes, she left about, I would say 5-6 years ago.
Well, it sounds like she was a pillar in her community, and her community is still here. So we would, welcome her to apply, but these changes aren't made yet. So we're here talking about these things right now in the hopes that we can make these changes moving forward.
Well, why we at that? Can I make a comment though regarding this? Look, I'm happy that some change being made, or at least this proposal. I wish it could be more than 15%. I'm more advocating like at least 20% to 25%, because and also the second thing I want to say is that this commission needs to stop approving people like the Beltramo, because they had enough land to build more, but 8 was their sweet spot. The reason I was doing math in my head is because within a few years, they would be able to make enough to basically pay for the development. And after that, they would rake in at least $500,000 every year, at least minimum, from their rental, even though they have one BMR unit. So I'm asking this commission to stop approving such, outlandish, proposals. And if you really care at all about affordable housing, we need to stop automatically approving such proposals, because 8, for them, that was their sweet spot. to maximize their profit, okay, bottom line profit. So my point is moving forward, that I wish that this commission would really seriously thinking. And look, I know the Beltramos are longtime residents, you know, many generations, and I like them, but what they were proposing, it was just really not good for where we want our community to be. And I'm asking you all just to consider every proposal in the future, such as the one that Beltramo presented before us last month. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment, Chelsea, and I can certainly understand the frustration. Part of what we're trying to do here is make sure that we are trying to hit our sweet spot where we incentivize developers to build and get enough units that are affordable to the folks that need them in the community. And we need to work with all parties to make sure that that happens. But I hear you on the desire to go higher on that percentage. It's hard from a development perspective to sign off on building a building. I think San Francisco tried 25% inclusionary and development dried up completely for a bit. So there's some anecdotal evidence that there is a point where a community like ours, which is very desirable to build in for a lot of different reasons, including the people in it and the amenities present, there is some evidence to say that, you know, there is a point that people will walk away because it's too hard and too expensive to build.
Well,
So I hear you.
Okay,
we-
I
we-
think
we
we need to focus.
we need to be tougher, I think.
We can't talk about that particular issue right now because we need to talk about the thing that was on the agenda. It is a meaty topic, worthy of discussion, but not on our agenda for today. So
Fair enough.
Lauren, passing it back to you. Pardon the chair intervention.
Appreciate you keeping us focused. So I guess the first thing that we're going to tackle is talking about the inclusionary guidelines for rental units. It's one of the things that we mentioned. And this kind of outlines the three different options as they were presented. The 15% across the board was intended to make administration and assessment of how feasible it would be to develop easier. And the 10% at extremely low, very low, and low was a slightly lower percentage, which our hope was would incentivize folks to develop at deeper levels of affordability. And then having that 25% deeply affordable and special needs via land donation and partnership. There's some conversation being had about whether it's first things first, we want the units. And if those units aren't financially feasible in the property, there's some example, some precedent out there for saying, okay, we'll allow you to give a land donation. So with that, that prefaced, yeah, Heather, I see you.
I just have a clarifying question about the 25% land donation. That sounds like a one attractive alternative. How is there a precedent set somewhere that we can point to where this was offered and the land was really donated and really built on?
So I'll take that.
Oh,
I don't have the details and I don't remember the details, but Housing Leadership Council did do, back when we could meet in person, an educational seminar thing. And they had someone from Eden Housing giving multiple examples. In that case, it was a development agreement. So it wasn't architected into the inclusionary requirement like we're proposing here, which is just for discussion. I mean, this needs, as you know, I really take to heart what Jan Stokely was saying. We need to get especially the third option, we definitely need to get it right. Anyway, so through a development agreement, so instead of doing the straight 15% or 10%, the developer, for-profit developer said, city, let's figure something else out. How about we donate this part of this huge parcel and we partner with this nonprofit housing developer and we'll get you way more units at deeper affordability because we'll be able to use tax credit financing, et cetera. So there are examples of it being a good thing. And in that case, the city was able to negotiate the development agreement to get what they needed. So that's the intent. We may not be able to do it in this like pre-formulated way, but this is why we're having this discussion.
there is a land donation offsite inclusionary option that exists in other cities though.
Mhm.
So the policy itself does exist. We wouldn't be the first city to devise this. And maybe, I mean, I'm getting outside the realm of this conversation right now, but this particular option might require a little bit more work. It probably varies project to project to evaluate the value of providing that offsite or off to the side option, partnering with an affordable housing developer. So there's probably an evaluation that needs to happen on a case by case basis that makes this option different from the other two. It's definitely, there's more discretion involved.
And that was one of the things that we talked about as well, was having the council weigh in every time that a decision needed to be made about accepting a land donation instead of a fee or instead of building on-site units. Other cities, like I know Mountain View has worked with their inclusionary ordinance on this, and I believe some developments have been done utilizing this offsite idea. So precedent has been set there. Does that answer your question, Heather?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Of course. Okay, Nevada.
Hi, thanks. So I'm a little confused when I look at this. Are we supposed to be advocating for one particular route to go, or are you trying to set something up wherein there are 3 different routes or paths to fulfill the requirement? And I will leave that question along with my own thoughts about how these particular policies work best, which is usually with a fair amount of flexibility built into them, because sites vary, developers vary, I mean, on the market rate side, so they have different motivations depending on kind of what kind of actor they are in the market. And having a lot of different ways to fulfill the requirement is usually a good thing.
To answer your question, the intention is that the developer can pick column A, column B, or column C, which is what you're advocating for.
Yes.
Okay.
I like flexibility myself in my day job.
Yeah.
And I would add that the land donation usually is a city council level. There might be something that's some assumptions that one could make that are fairly safe, and it usually does get wrapped up into other types of entitlements, whether that's the securing of a BMR loan of some sort, land donation. We could specify if that's a land donation to the city, at which time the city ground leases to a particular entity, or the other myriad ways that there's city involvement related to processing entitlements.
Thank you kindly. Okay.
And this
So-
is done all over the place. I mean, some version of a land donation. So there's a lot of precedent that has been set. And there are deals that exist, I mean, all over the Bay Area that are using some kind of land donation or something that really walks and talks a lot like a land donation. There's a few other ways to fulfill that.
Right. Part of the question here is that we're trying to get a read on from council is, are we trying for more on-site units? Are we trying for more 100% affordable properties? Which are the things? I am personally of the opinion that we need both to be able to hit our goals. But go ahead.
Yeah, the one last thing I'll say about the land donation, sorry, I'm just kind of like, thoughts are sort of popping up, but is that, where the land is tends to matter a lot. Like you can buy a piece of land in the Bay Area for $3 million or 13 million. And the economics of that have to sort of be able to be reflected in how it's valued. Which is again why there's also often usually like some sort of a calculation or justification that ends up getting approved by a city council level type body, because it's just a lot different if you're receiving a donation of a piece of land that's in that upward level versus a land that might net out to say $50,000 or $150,000 a door. That used to be kind of standard, and now you can see that go up quite a bit. So depending on the number, where it is, the cost of the land, the number of units that are going to be provided, there's a lot of nuance that kind of goes into all that. Okay, thanks.
Of course. And the services that you're going to provide also significantly increase the price per door. Okay, Karen, I see you.
I have a question for Nevada and maybe Rachel. Given what Nevada just said about generally a land donation strategy would require city council approval, that to me is kind of liberating, because then we don't have to say X% in our guidelines. We just say that's an option subject to city council approval. And then all of those things can be weighed in the moment, including, we have 0 housing in Menlo Park for people with developmental disabilities. So we want that to be the population you target, et cetera, et cetera. So that might simplify it. And so my question is, am I correct? And my second question is, should we consider a land donation option for ownership units as well?
You can't answer the second part, but for the first part, I guess I'm thinking that maybe we should look at the Redwood City ordinance that has a few different pathways with of how you can get there. I'm not sure if that was studied before putting together this.
Yeah.
An intruder, pardon me.
And I would add that, yeah, that's what I was getting at with the discretionary review, that it's probably going to go to city council, and that means that it will vary, and we will have to line up this option against 15% onsite or 10% onsite and demonstrate that in fact this is a greater benefit to the community.
Mhm.
And it would be, the onus would be on the developer to demonstrate that. And then it would have to be substantiated by the city and then agreed upon by city council. So it's much more onerous in that sense, but you could get a much better result from it, and it eliminates the off-turn well, it's just not feasible on our site because of X. You know, we just can't make it happen on our project because why? Well, then can you make it happen somewhere off site, or can you make it happen elsewhere on your project and partnering with an affordable housing developer? By the way, you have to demonstrate that doing so provides a public benefit that is at least the same as the other two, or not, if not greater. So.
And
That-
one
and
of-
it, oh, sorry, and I was gonna say, it also adds more on staff, and this is a category that we would have to be careful in crafting the language around it and making sure that the development actually happens, especially if it's off-site and not just the market rate development, so tying the affordable development to the market rate development and things of that nature.
And one of the other things that we talked about on Monday as a group was the importance of making sure that development is seen across Menlo Park. So one of the things that one of the fears that often happens with land donation, as Nevada spoke to earlier, you can have a land donation that's $3 million or $13 million. If somebody is building along El Camino Real and they figure that it's not financially feasible to include BMR units, we don't want somebody to then buy a plot of land in like the Bayfront and say that is supposed to be where a new 100% affordable building is. Like, that's the only place to develop. It's not. There are a lot of places to develop, as we saw on Monday. We just have to get creative and a little flexible. Okay, do we have any other comments? Yes.
I just have a question for the commissioners not on our committee. Just, any comments or reactions to this or questions? And if you are not sure, are there, in terms of who should we reach out to, or like recommendations for the committee, because we'd like to bring this back for a vote next month. So I guess the question is, what do you all need to be able to approve this? I guess, would you need changes? Would you need additional public input? That's the question I would love to hear about.
John.
How many developers did you all talk to about these ideas?
None. So
I was using my experience with previous cities administering their BMR programs in Mountain View, Palo Alto, and Los Altos, what they used. And when I worked at a nonprofit developer, that experience. Rachel.
Yeah, I also didn't speak directly with a developer for this, but flying underneath the 15% requirement was one of the things that made it a little bit easier to think through this, because once you get past that 15%, there tends to be more pushback. So that's part of the thinking behind the staying below 15%, except with the exception of the land donation category. So that's kind of like a threshold number or percentage that at least I've heard in my perhaps limited professional experience. So
we also referred to the BAE study, which you'll remember from one of your first meetings, as to what is feasible at what density and such. So we looked at that as well.
Nevada.
Is it, I'm asking, is it appropriate for us to solicit input from developers and say, hey, if we did something like this, would it make you more likely to build in Menlo Park or less likely to build in Menlo Park?
I think it's perfectly reasonable and helpful to ask that question. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, that would be probably my first question that I would seek before voting, before being in a position to vote on something like this. Second question is, how might this relate to the SB9, SB10 improvements, right? I think those put us in a greater position to do a greater number of smaller projects. How do you, does this help that facilitate more of those, or frustrate more of those types of developments?
That's a really good question. And it's something I thought about too, because we don't want to disincentivize someone from turning their single family home into a duplex. But I think the way to resolve that is to address people who are developing duplexes. And, if we want to incentivize that, let's incentivize that and say, you can be exempt from the inclusionary BMR fee or whatever, rather than putting it in here, if that makes sense.
And because it is the 15%, it doesn't really kick in terms of units on site until 7. Am I doing my math right?
Yeah.
So you are talking about a fee up until that point, so you're not hitting the threshold at 4, where all of a sudden you need to build a unit on site, because that I would definitely think, okay, that's kind of a disincentive there. But yeah, also to Karen's point, maybe a fee reduction, but at least there's no required unit on site in the 4-plex scenario.
I see that. Thank you. I get the point now that it really won't affect those. And then I guess my third question is it, I love the idea of inclusionary zoning for larger projects, especially, but are we doing anything here that discourages a developer from trying 100% affordable project from the ground up on maybe subsidized land, or in an area where the city says we want more affordable housing here?
Well, I'll let other people answer. I don't see how this would disincentivize that.
Okay.
Usually the things that disincentivize it are things that are like, if it was a land donation and you have to have closed and started construction on the affordable before your market rate can start. So like it gets into the details. When you start to link the timing in ways that are very complicated, where you have 2 groups that now need to sync, that kind of stuff usually, if it doesn't altogether discourage, it creates a lot of tension. And it can be really hard to manage.
Yeah, I think for any mere mortal to navigate the details of some of the things we've discussed tonight is a challenge. So my only concern here is that we make it more complex, and that ends up having a discouraging effect on developers wanting to work with us. So I think input from real developers saying this is a great idea, and it would make us, the clarity provided here or the flexibility provided here would make us want to come to Menlo Park. That's what I think I would need to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and along those lines, I mean, I would be interested to know, like, if it's discouraging for market rate folks to basically not have the fee option after 7 units. Is that right? The fee option's gone after 7 units. You have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You have to build. That would be a specific question that I'd want to know the answer to. And that's mostly just because of my previous comment about how flexibility is kind of king.
I should put my hand down, but I don't think we've changed anything in that regard. The previous, the status quo is either 1 unit, or it's 15%, or it's 10%. but there's always an out that is not preferred of paying an in lieu fee.
Mhm. Okay, that wasn't necessarily clear that you could still just pay a fee. Not that I advocate for it, but I'm just,
We really don't want people to pay the fee. We want the units, but I think legally it has to be an option.
And the B option, can we?
You want to show the slide with the A or the B?
Yes.
Sorry, 1 second. I just want to make sure I'm going in the right
Yeah, you got it.
You're there.
You're
Direction.
on the right
The
slide.
B option doesn't go, did I hear you right, Commissioner Raymond? You said the B option goes away?
no, that was my interpretation of this slide, but I guess you're saying that there's still a standalone fee option. So maybe just clarifying that even if
Wait.
it's not something we prefer.
I think
what it
Rachel
is.
heard B as in buzz, and you said fee with an F.
Fee.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you thought it went from 10 to 15 after 7 units. And I was like, no, there's an option B. Okay, I'm sorry. I understand now. Sorry.
Yeah, so we call it feeing out. And is there still an opportunity to fee out?
My understanding is that the Palmer fix, the state law that allowed us to impose the inclusionary requirement on rentals, required a fee option. But
There's been
yeah.
a lot of work that's been done about financial feasibility regarding these things and trying to incentivize on-site units versus having people fee out. So we didn't spend a ton of time talking about the fee structure, but your point is very well taken that we should figure out how we want that to fit in this overall toolbox when it comes to development, if that's something we want to incentivize or not. And Rachel, I see that you have thoughts.
Well, I was going to say also that the fee, if we're pegging it to the point of indifference, as we always refer to it, then that'll be pegged to the affordability level of the unit that is owed. So if we allow a fee, we could require the fee to be paid at the lowest levels of affordability and not LI, pegged to ELI or VLI or whichever option it's under. So there is the option to pay the fee, but being clear about the fact that you're paying the fee that matches to the lower affordability levels. Right.
Yeah, so I think that's where I would want to just like see some of these options, sort of like a scenario of what that would look like, theoretical scenario, just to understand, like, are these even remotely roughly equivalent, or because it seems like you could build a pro forma off of each scenario and then assess from a monetary perspective if there's one that kind of is more of a financial hit than another, and then one could make a series of assumptions based on kind of like how is this going to play out for people. Clearly, if you're a huge landowner and you have land to give, then you might go with the land, but there aren't really that many of those around. So, if that, I'm not sure, but I think like if we were coming back to vote on something, that wanting to see a little bit more specificity on how the numbers work, and then and this is really for Mike, but just, part of what I look for in city staff is to have a real understanding of your city's pipeline, which I don't know what your pipeline is at the moment, but I do know that you're going through a housing element process where there are some pretty steep goals. And so, how are you looking at sort of the building up of fees as to potentially get, dedicated towards future projects? These things kind of all have to talk to each other, like how you're planning to fund the pipeline, which is, is a higher number of units than what has been produced in the city in any given decade ever. So I'd be curious to know kind of how you see some of these things being pieced together. I mean, we were in a pretty unusual position to be able to, through the NOFA process, which I conflicted myself out of, but through the NOFA process, the city did dedicate to 3 separate projects, and do we think that this particular the passage of this particular policy would slow down the rate by which we accumulated fees, and would that have some sort of impact on the pipeline? I'm not sure, but those are things that I would seek your guidance on, Mike.
And if I may, I know there's a lot to digest in that, but I appreciate the comment, Commissioner Merriman. So I know the housing element process is quite complex, as you know. So there is a lot of moving pieces. And tonight's discussion is really meant to be kind of to test the waters. So and really bring the feedback from the commission to really, shape where we're looking at, and essentially wanted to, decision with the subcommittee and myself and staff, just on the staff side of things, was really to test the water, so to speak, just so we didn't start moving in a direction and spending staff time on potential aspects that we would be researching and analyzing to bring back to the commission for future recommendations, and that maybe weren't going to hold any water, for lack of a better term. So this is all preliminary at this point, but definitely appreciate what
And I think
what you're
along the
referring to.
lines, yeah, I think along the lines of kind of what you're saying, if there's another piece of information that is presently missing, but that would be very helpful for me in terms of context, is really just understanding then the affordable housing needs of people in Menlo Park as you see them today, so that any preferences that get considered are sort of considered in this context of like, what are the myriad needs of people. I mean, we've heard from various disability advocates, and they present stories that I'm very sympathetic to. And disabilities are a complicated thing that are beyond my sphere of expertise. I always look to the public sector to really say these are the needs in the community, and then try to engage. One would try to match what those needs were to our given community. And then this is a additional comment. I don't know where to put it, so I'm just going to say it now. But I think we should consider asking that our BMR units are accessible, and if not, adaptable. I think adaptable is a probably easier bar to reach. And I'm not sure how that would interplay with the way that the particular concept of offering a strong preference for somebody who's wheelchair bound would play out if we actually just asked for all the units to be adaptable. But adaptable units can serve a variety of different types of disabilities. And what I have found is that it's hard to know who might move into which home and what they might need ahead of time. So
I just wanted to, I think, remind us, or clarify that we do have residential projects that qualify for SB 330 streamlining in the pipeline. So this set of changes is timely. We would like to get these clarifications in place before those projects come through. And we also have the housing element process, which is going to make more changes to our BMR guidelines and other policies in order to meet the bigger needs of affirmatively furthering fair housing and planning for 1,500 below market rate units, et cetera, et cetera. So this is really kind of yesterday's news, but it's important enough that we get it in as soon as possible while we're planning for the future with the housing element policies.
Thank you for that reminder. So I want to recap what I heard here before we move on to the next group of discussion points kind of that we're talking about. So I heard the request for discussion with developers, some theoretical scenarios and pro formas, also a desire to see where there is precedent for these things and what that has looked like in the future, and would utilizing any of these changes slow down how we can allocate funding to BMR units. Also heard it's important to know what the affordable housing needs of Menlo Park residents are, and wanting to check on if we can ask for them to be accessible or adaptable units. So is there anything that I left out? Hearing none, I'm going to move us on.
Just the
Yes.
just those scenarios.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have theoretical scenarios / pro formas was what I was looking. No, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's it. And then, but there's a sort of, there was an extra bit of that related to the land donation because you have an X% there.
Mhm.
So
I think given the input we've heard today, I would be inclined to take out the X% and just say it requires city council approval.
yeah, but maybe look at the Redwood City ordinance and see if you can put something
Okay.
in there that, you know,
Sounds
that our
good.
neighbors are doing that makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a desire to check in with surrounding jurisdictions and see what's happening there, because that's one of the things that incentivizes or disincentivizes development is.
And to be clear, we did do that. It's just I don't think we really focused on the land donation part of the other ordinances, but we looked at Mountain View, East Palo Alto, Redwood City, Burlingame, Hayward. We looked at a bunch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Redwood City has a very kind of forward-thinking ordinance that really drives you to do the units, and it spells out kind of a number of ways to get to the affordability on the land donation that I think would be a good thing for us to check out. Thanks.
Great.
We'll check it out. All right, so moving on next, Mike, can we take us to, do we want to go back to the discussion prompt slides?
I think we should go. I think we've covered rental.
Yes.
Right. Why don't we go to ownership and then we'll end with preferences.
That was my intent. Okay.
Stepping on your toes. Let me go on mute.
No worries, no worries. So Mike, if we can go back to the tail end of the slide deck and where we had the summary slides. I think those are a good point of discussion regarding the ownership inclusionary. Or am I making things up? I see that you are there, but you're not unmuted, so I don't know.
What? Did I mute? Yes, I did.
Okay, if you could keep going towards the discussion prompts.
Just to clarify, I've made Karen a co-host just in.
Okay, it looks like Mike's having some connectivity issues. I see that he made me co-host. So I am going to bring up the document and share it myself.
Thank you kindly.
Mhm. Okay. Share screen. Okay. I think this is the slide we want. Is that correct? And can you see my screen?
Yes, it's in the full PDF view rather than full screen view, but can you guys read that? Is that okay? Perfect.
Okay.
All right. So thoughts, questions, concerns about changes here. Chelsea, what's up?
So we set the in lieu fee and the fractional unit fee. Is that what we do?
We
we
make
know what that would be?
recommendations.
Okay. Go ahead.
I was just saying that we make recommendations to council and then they kind of sign off on what they think the best path forward is, taking into consideration all of the recommendations from various councils, et cetera, or from various commissions and staff.
Is it
Wait.
going to be on a case-by-case basis,
No,
like
I think, yeah, I think
development? Or
Chelsea's asking who determines what the in lieu fee is? It's the difference for any given project. It's the difference between the market price and the BMR price. Isn't
and so
that
the
correct?
council will determine that?
No, it's I've read the BMR guidelines. So my recollection, and I would love for Mike to confirm this, is that when the unit is put on the market, the sales price for, like, let's say a 2-bedroom ownership unit at market price, let's say that's $1 million. But in order to be affordable to someone at low income, it has to be available at 200,000. So the in lieu fee would be 800,000.
Okay. And what's the difference between that and the fractional unit fee?
If somebody were to develop 3 units, then I don't know what 15% of 3 is. It's 4.5, right? So, sorry, not 4.5, 0.45 a unit. So it'd be, if the in lieu fee is 800,000, then for 0.45 units, or let's say it was 0.5 units, then they would owe 400,000.
Okay, thank you.
What does the statement, first actual unit must be low income affordable mean?
That means, like, as it's laid out in the proposal, which is kind of a scenario, when you get to 7 units, you actually owe a unit. And we say half the unit should be low income affordable and half should be moderate income affordable. If we leave it up to the developer, the first one they owe will be moderate income, and we're specifying that the first one has to be low income affordable.
Thank you.
A detail that we didn't lay out here that will require some thought is between 1 and 6. I imagine the in lieu fee would be the average of low income and moderate affordability. And after, I don't know, like that's something to consider so that it's not, there are no step functions, but it's linear. So anyway, I see raised hands. I'm going to stop speculating.
Heather. Heather, go for it.
Sorry about that. I moved suddenly and I was attempting to unmute Nevada, Commissioner Merriman. I just, a point of clarification, I'm the 1 to 6 units, 15% required in lieu fee. Does that mean if, so in the scenario that would it be 15% of the 800,000, or would they actually owe like that amount of what would be in your fictional scenario? Would they actually owe that full fee?
They would owe the fee equivalent to 15% times the number of units in the development. So if it resulted in, gosh, I wish it were 20%, it'd be so much easier to make the calculation.
Say that the property is worth like $10 million, right? That makes things easier. And then 15% of that, or sorry, no, that doesn't make things easier. I'll stop now.
Okay, let's say that somebody's building 4 units. The 15% requirement means
It's on the 4 units.
Yeah.
And
So
then what results from that is a fraction,
0.6.
0.6, and you multiply 0.6 times the in lieu fee. And that's the fee that they owe. They owe 60% of the in lieu fee because they would only owe 60% of the unit.
So in our scenario that we used before, the in lieu fee was $800,000. And so the fee would be $480,000, which is 0.6 of 800,000. Good question, Heather.
This is
I'm
why.
gonna nod and pretend I got that.
Well,
I think I get it. No, I get the basic idea. I was like trailing a little bit behind in the calculations, but my understanding is it's the in lieu fee is and I
Okay,
don't,
look, you know what? Can we do it one more time? Let's say we're building 3 units. The developer owes 15% of 3 units. Point 0.15 times 3 is 0.45. I could have done that in my head. 0.45 units are owed. They can't build 0.45 of a unit, 45% of a unit. So the in lieu fee is $800,000. So they owe 45% of $800,000. Which I'm not doing the math right now. It's a little less than $400,000.
so I guess where I understand that, and I apologize. I know I'm kind of beating a dead horse here. The in lieu fee, it sounds like there's a calculation called an in lieu fee, but you actually don't owe the in lieu fee. You owe 45% of the in lieu fee.
Yes.
Okay.
If you're building 3 units.
Okay.
Mhm.
It sounds like this is another set of another point in which real world examples and scenarios could play a really good and defining, could be a great example
Yep.
to bring to the table. Got it. Here
That
you
would be really helpful.
Yep. I agree.
and Heather, just to let you know, like, your questions are absolutely valid. I guarantee you somebody else has those questions that is listening in as well. So don't feel like you can't ask them. Absolutely should.
Yeah. And our city council members will have these questions when they see it. So we want to make it understand.
As a former technical writer, I remember my job has long been to ask the dumb questions.
Well, then, mad love for you being here and bringing that with you. Thank you. Nevada, I saw your hand.
Hi, I have a couple questions. You already beat me to it on like kind of giving us a couple scenarios. So thanks for picking up that comment again. And then how common is it to have an in lieu fee on a single unit?
Never heard of it.
Yeah, me either.
Yeah.
Is it legal?
Good question.
You mean an in lieu fee on like a single project? So
Single
instead of
family
having a
home.
lieu fee that you adopt,
I mean,
and then it applies to every development? Is that what you're saying?
If you're building 1 unit, if it's a 1 unit project.
Oh, how do you determine what the,
oh,
Is it common to have an in lieu fee for a 1 unit project?
oh, it exists.
I think you might need to call it a housing impact fee.
Yeah,
Instead of
I have a
in lieu
lot
fee.
of questions about it at 1. That would be probably best answered by an attorney of some sort. And then in the 2 to 6 range, I have fewer questions, but I'm still curious about like how often are we doing that or seeing that?
Mhm.
And what's our rationale for kind of doing the break at 6?
There's no break.
Not a break, but so it previously you had a category that was 1 to 4, and now that's 1 to 6.
No, conceptually, that's not correct. There's a 15% requirement, no matter what. But you bring a good point, like what 15% of what if you're building a single home?
I think Nevada's talking about the status quo versus the
Status quo
proposal.
versus proposal.
Mhm.
So wanting to hear a little bit more about I would say that there's, when I use the word break, it's between 4 and 5 and 9 and 10 and 19 and 20 in the status quo, and sort of like, why have we tinkered around with that at the lower levels, it looks like. And it appears to be able to get fee on anything, on everything. And how common is it to see a fee on a single unit in particular? But I'm also curious in the 2 to 6 range.
I believe at the proposal level, the reason that they had those breakpoints was due to the 15%. So it resulted in a unit at that point.
At 7.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay.
That's sort of that's a little bit of a scenario, like what you're asking for, but not with a lot of detail, but just to explain how you go from in lieu fee to a unit, and then you have a unit and in lieu fee for a while, and then you get 2 units, and then you get it. So.
And then I guess I'm just kind of stuck on sort of the whole kind of legal conceptualization of an in lieu fee. Like, do you need an in lieu fee on a single unit? I don't know, but it seems like it's worthwhile to ask our city attorney and kind of really turn that over and around, just because this is a study session, and I see that we have 6 wonderful attendees, but I would hate to propose something that's going to bring out 200 angry people if we don't need to. So what can we look at that and understand what our justification would be for that? Because it gives me a lot of pause, and I'm going to continue to meditate on this for the next month or so. But
my thought, Nevada, is if you call it a housing impact fee, then to me it makes sense, because if you build a giant home and plan to employ a gardener and a housekeeper and a nanny and a this and that and a house manager, whatever, you're bringing 4 jobs into the community, and some of them are very low income earners. And so you are having a housing impact on the community, and you should pay a housing impact fee. So that's my rationale in terms like policy rationale. But I agree that in lieu fee is not the right word.
But for those of us who live actually in a very humble bungalow and not in a giant home, and are 2-job families trying to kind of make it work here in Silicon Valley, I'm just curious, like, where does that that cost of entry already is very high here. And I'm wondering, is it reasonable to put a fee on there as well? I mean, perhaps maybe if it's a home above a certain square footage, but if it, I don't know where this conversation exactly goes, but for a humble 1-bedroom or a humble unit, I don't know if it does more harm than good to do it, honestly. So
that was some of the discussion that I heard in Palo Alto as well, was how are you going to ask me to build housing, but then charge me more money for the housing that I'm building to build other housing. It is something that certainly came up in discussions. But I think that your point about a bungalow versus a McMansion is a good one. And it's certainly something to consider. Is there a certain square footage that we want to do this at?
Or can the fee be per square footage? Perhaps, I don't know, something to think about.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Well, there are more opportunities to update BMR guidelines. We can do it over and over and over again. So.
And what a joy that would be for all of us. Absolutely. Yes.
Okay, guys, let's try to do better than what we did on Monday.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments or questions about ownership? Oh, sorry, Lauren, I'm going on mute again.
It's fine. I was going to ask the same question and leave a little room for any further thoughts. What I'm heard from talking about the ownership inclusionary guidelines is to consider some flexibility regarding single family homes. If we want to talk about the legality and precedent for one unit, also having some real world scenarios with dollars involved where we can see what fees are actually like for some of these property groups, unit groups, would be helpful to further the conversation. Is there anything else that you guys would like us to check into, bring forward, bring back to you? Okay, hearing none, I am going to move us along to the inclusionary preference, the BMR preference, which is the last one, guys. We're almost there. Okay. And Karen, since this was yours, I would love to let you lead discussion.
All right, so the color coding, the blue indicates changes, but there is a mistake in that the previously lived in Menlo Park for at least 3 years is actually new. We don't have that in our current guidelines. So those are the changes. Any comments, any questions? And basically the bottom line question is, if it comes back exactly like this next month, are you ready to vote for it? Is there anything you need in terms of public input or questions or changes?
Yeah, Karen, I've got a couple of questions.
Uh-huh.
How do you validate this? Any of these requirements? What's the documentation process? Who's the judge?
Mm-hmm. I know some of the answers, but I'm going to let Mike take this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And that is a great question, Commissioner Pimentel. To kind of start to answer that question, so the city contracts with a third party who administers our BMR housing program, and that contractor, their name is House Keys. So just in regards, and for anyone in the public that's listening, so the Menlo Park specific website is housekeys10, the number 10.com. So it's housekeys10.com. And on that website, folks are able to sign up for our interest lists for both ownership and rental opportunities. So they basically receive a household registration number, and that basically profile registration allows them to apply for opportunities. So when they do apply for opportunities, and I think this will answer part of your question as well. So when they apply for opportunities, the city of Menlo Park does have preferences. However, I also wanted to make it clear that it doesn't not allow folks who don't meet these preferences to apply. So they just have a lower preference. So I wanted to make that clear as well. So when it comes to a drawing, which I've attended myself for units that have become available, a drawing will happen. Everyone is ranked. And then those folks who do have a preference, it's basically a re-ranking where they'll basically move to the top of the list based on their preference. So that's a little insight onto the programming aspect of it, but I'm happy to answer more questions about that area.
So the home key folks would assume the process of picking the winners. We wouldn't have any liability in that regard. So somebody says, well, I actually don't have a wheelchair, I use crutches, so I should have been there and I'm suing you. That all lands on home key.
House Keys.
House
Just to
keys.
make a correction. And it is a really transparent process. So I wanted to mention that as well. So the results are also posted on that House Keys 10 website as well. So and when I log into as a witness essentially of the lottery, I'm actually on their platform, I'm actually selecting that I have officially witnessed the lottery. And I believe my name is attached to those results as a witness. So there's, it's not, there's liability isn't as big of a concern as in regards to the process. It's transparent.
Sorry, I'm saying, I'm trying to get at a different issue. So I want to hop up on the chair. So I get a note from my doctor. I run down to the medical supply store and I get a wheelchair. Now I'm more qualified to get this than the next fella in line. I just want to make sure we're not in a position where the city of Menlo Park is having to make those judgment calls and evaluations. That's all on Home Key.
On house keys, yes. So
House keys.
so in this instance, and I don't mean to keep correcting you. I just don't want anyone in the public.
No, it's
to
fine.
go
I just,
somewhere else.
that it's not the city of Menlo Park's responsibility. It's House Key's responsibility.
That's correct. And
That answers
do-
my question. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to really quickly add. So for because this will come into play for the 2008 displacement provision. So currently we have an affidavit that anyone who applies to the program, they would need to fill out. So when they go through, they are having to provide documentation essentially that proves this. So
Got it. But House Key figures it out. And if the applicant is cutting an edge, it's on House Key. It's not on us.
Yeah, correct.
Next question, in that process, and I'm unfamiliar with it, so I'll take your word for it, Mike. Is it a process that we believe currently unhoused individual, maybe with mental or physical disabilities, is going to be able to navigate that application process and actually get to the in line or get their fair place in line?
So I would say the most likely outcome where an individual with that description that you mentioned would be signing up, would probably be where they've gone into some type of transitional housing and they have a caseworker who's actually assisting them, would be the most common. It's not to say that someone couldn't do this from a smartphone if they had the means to do so. But that would probably be the most common or likely, scenario where someone would sign up if they were homeless and had some challenges that they needed to overcome to sign up.
Thank you for that additional information. I appreciate it.
And just for a point of clarification on the process here, we're saying anybody from anywhere can get on these lists, but the point when a unit becomes available, they do a lottery and the person who gets number one in the lottery is not a bona fide wheelchair user or has lived or worked in Menlo Park. So they have neither of those preference. And the person who is, and number 2, 3, 4, and 5 don't have any of those preferences either. Number 6 at that point would move up to the top of the list because they have that level of preference, rather than number 1 being the person it goes to. Does that make sense? Perfect. Okay.
And so the wheelchair user is not part of the live work preference.
I see them as distinct, but I'm open to feedback.
Just to be clear, our intention is that a wheelchair user from anywhere, maybe we should say anywhere in the region, but anywhere, has preference, even over someone who lives and works in Menlo Park or was displaced. So that open for conversation, input on that, but that is the intention.
Has that
And
been done anywhere?
That's just based on Rhonda's experience that is such a high need that we need to meet it.
Some of the feedback that we got from House Keys was that they have a list and they're working with a ton of different cities. And so the folks who are wheelchair users have kind of a like flag on their account or what have you. And they know that they can, House Keys can shuttle them to different to different waiting lists, essentially, or interest lists, and would do so in this case, but they have told us in the past, or at least they told Rhonda, who told us, that there is a true and large need for folks who do use wheelchairs to get housing.
Yeah, I think this is one where having a little bit more context from the city would be helpful. You know, this is like at the level of a change that I feel that it would be really hard to put it forth and then and like kind of push that to the city council without understanding, you know, if there's really an appetite to change to eliminate the live work preference.
But it's not eliminated.
But if we have so few BMRs that change over year, you could assume that all of them would now go to bona fide wheelchairs users who are likely not living or working in Menlo Park. So I feel like the impact of it would be, and
Yeah.
I mean, as somebody who has done a lot of studies of this, because we have to, for all preferences in my day job, actually go through and understand, like, what is it like, what's likely to happen? I think that there's a lot that's likely to happen here that might take our policies pretty far afield from what I've heard from city council previously. And most city councils really look to their live work preferences to try to in some way use the public money that their city has to take care of their own first. Now, I don't personally believe that. I'm just trying to speak from like how I think this policy is going to roll out, which is if you have 5 BMRs that change over in a year, they will all go to wheelchair users, and some may be from Menlo Park, but many will not. And if this becomes known that Menlo Park is the sole place where you can be from Gilroy and get a unit if you have a wheelchair, then you know the catchment area would be the entire Bay Area, because I don't think this is anywhere else that this occurs. So it just we need to look at that a little bit and understand kind of what that would be, and then also kind of look and see what the need is in the community. My previous point that I misplaced a couple slides back, but that understanding kind of what are the disability needs in the community, like in terms of what we're trying to solve for. Thanks.
Thank you. Lauren, I think Rachel has her hand up.
You're leading discussion on this one, my
I am?
dear.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can't get it right. Laura, Rachel.
I don't want to make this going longer than it needs to either. But the BMR waiting list threshold eligibility criteria, Mike, correct me, did we just go over this? But you have to live or work in Menlo Park to even be on the list. Is that true? No.
No.
Actually get a preference for living and working in Menlo Park. You can be on the list even if you don't live or work in Menlo Park.
You can live in Manhattan and be on the BMR interest list.
That's really unclear to me from reading page 11 of the BMR guidelines, because it says applicants are eligible to have their names placed on the list if they meet the following 3 requirements: currently live or work, meet the current income limit, and all applicants live together as a household.
And I believe that would be a change based on the administration. Previously, when we were with another administrator, they said that they would only have folks on the waiting list that were eligible. So they constantly recertified people and made sure that they lived or worked and hit XYZ preferences. But we have since moved away from that, I believe.
Yeah.
Mike, correct me if I'm wrong.
So let me add something. There's also a ton of cleanup work that we need to do to our BMR guidelines, because we are doing some best practices in our administration now that are not reflected in the guidelines, like that example that you just gave, Rachel. We're not doing that anymore. It's really invasive to people on just on an interest list to have to provide their information every year. So we don't do that anymore. We only get their information when a unit becomes available. And so there's also a lot of cleanup that we're going to do at some point to catch up with actual practices.
Well, let's add that to the list. Sorry,
Yeah.
If I may, through the chair.
Mhm.
There is cleanup that we would, whatever is recommended from the commission and previous to even there being a recommendation that you all would be considering, staff is going to be doing a deeper dive and analysis. So in regards to Commissioner Merriman's, just seeing more context from the city, that will be step 2. This is really, again, just preliminary. Staff will be doing much deeper dive in regards to a lot of what is discussed tonight. And it's not to say that a staff recommendation specifically to council wouldn't align with the Housing Commission's recommendation, but the items in the presentation tonight are potential suggestions from the subcommittee. And please correct me if I'm wrong, subcommittee, if I'm speaking out of turn, but or out of line. But those are recommendations that came from the subcommittee for everyone's to gauge everyone's where everyone
Directional.
would stand on those. Yes.
Yeah.
Direction. Thank you.
Yeah, because we wouldn't want Mike to do a whole bunch of work and then come to you all and you go, what? We don't want to do that. So it sounds like we're in a good place for Mike to go ahead and do all that work now. If I'm interpreting the feedback appropriately.
Yeah, and I also wanted to mention that I've already been just as far as the staff process, just to be transparent, I've provided some summary to the city attorney's office, and we will be looping in the city attorneys, for further analysis as well. So I just wanted to provide that clarification too.
Yeah, that was my next point, especially with the proposed number 1. I think that you might want to seek outside counsel on property management attorney, somebody who has experience with that, because I don't know how you would manage that particular preference.
Thank you. All right. Any other comments? Because I think we are at the end of our agenda item, I believe.
I'll move to adjourn. I just want to.
Well, we're not going to adjourn because we have other agenda items,
sure.
but I think we,
Right.
but go ahead.
I'll just reiterate my comment that before everybody assumes that these BMR guidelines are all sanguine with everybody on the commission, I'd want to hear from developers that what we're doing doesn't discourage them, but actually encourages them. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so I think that concludes our ad hoc subcommittee, or the item D, whatever it was, the agenda item we just did. And we're at reports and announcement. We will forego the ad hoc subcommittee report because we just discussed that in detail. Commissioner updates. Does anybody have any commissioner updates? I have one. Housing Leadership Day is coming up, and I sent this through Mike to the commission, but it's a really good way to learn about policy, new ideas, case studies of what other jurisdictions might be doing in San Mateo County. And when we used to do it in person, is a good way to meet people. Maybe not so much this time. And then the other thing is the county's Let's Talk Housing program is coming up on a series of 4 in virtual meetings. One is specifically on affordable housing, which should be really of interest to us given our mandate. Another is on housing and racial justice. Anyway, I just for your reference, I just sent the information to the city council email log. So I recommend checking that out. Each one is an hour-long meeting at 6 p.m. on different dates in the next month. I think that's it for me. Any other commissioner updates? Rachel.
I would like to let you know that this is my last housing commission meeting because I am relocating out of Menlo Park. So I can no longer serve on this commission, which I deeply regret, but I'm happy to hand it over to another very capable and ready or what have you person, whoever comes next. So thank you, everybody. It has been a wonderful 3 years, and I will continue to do my day job in East Palo Alto. So I'm still a stakeholder on the peninsula. I just not a stakeholder.
Wow. Very sorry to lose you, Rachel.
I'm not
But-
prepared for that level of update, Commissioner Horst. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. I will just say, I remember when Commissioner Horst was an applicant for the Housing Commission, and I read all the applications and called some council members like, Rachel Horst looks amazing. She's a housing nerd. Please appoint her. So thank you for a good 3 years.
Thank you. I encourage anybody listening too, because I had to apply twice to get on. So if you didn't apply on the first time, definitely apply again.
Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, staff updates and announcement. That's
All right.
you, Mike.
Thank you, Madam. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I also wanted to, I figured Rachel would be making a announcement, so I wanted to thank Commissioner Horst for her service on the Housing Commission. And I did look it up. I believe your first commission meeting was in May of 2018. So we definitely appreciate your service over the last few years. And I know you've given a lot to our commission, so we appreciate your extensive dedication and contributions for sure. And I know that all the commissioners will definitely miss your presence here. So thank you.
Yes.
I also did want to mention with that as kind of a follow-up for Commissioner Horst's seat, the city clerk's office will be holding a special recruitment during the, I thought I wrote down the month, but I think it'll begin November 1st, I believe, which is when Commissioner Horst's term officially will, or when she'll be officially resigned from the commission. So that'll be starting, it technically has already started in the background, but I believe an official recruitment will be expected to be released in early November. So, and I'll have follow-up items just as far as housekeeping, vice chair roles, and all of that, being Commissioner Horst is our current vice chair. So I'll be circling back on that front as well. I also just wanted to mention for those listening, for Commissioner Grove's announcement for Housing Leadership Day. It is on October 22nd, and it's from, I believe, 10 to 2. So I don't think that got mentioned, but I just wanted to add that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
And last update is, let's see, I will be sending out a poll to commissioners for November meetings. So there is a possibility that we would have, and this is where I'll ask for everyone's feedback, but there's a potential for multiple meetings in November, whether or not we'll have something for a December meetings. So I know it's been we've had 2 meetings this week, and it would potentially be 2 meetings in November. So it potentially be a regular meeting on the 3rd, and would be specific to the housing element process and policies for the production of affordable housing specifically. So there is, and I wanted to make this point earlier, there you know, we're kind of doing the BMR guidelines items. So there's going to be some policy probably overlap in certain regards, but I think what you all will be doing with the BMR informs some of that process too. So, and not to mention, hopefully the guidelines will get, we'll have that going to council well before the next housing element cycle starts. So just wanted to make that clear as well. So I believe that's all of my updates.
Okay, and I realized I
Thank you.
skipped an item, E3, which is recommend future agenda items. And I would like to recommend maybe another, I know that house key is very busy. It has been busy, but whenever they're ready, I think it would be really good to bring them back to do a presentation for us, for the public. I think it'd be wonderful whenever they're ready. Anyone else have a future agenda item?
Absolutely.
Mike, your sound is coming in and out. We did, I think, understand everything you said previously, but just, yeah.
Sorry about that. It might be my internet connection. Apologies.
Yeah. Okay.
I would like to understand more about some of the component pieces of the housing element related to policies. And I'm not sure, Mike, when there will be kind of drafts of the actual document put together, but there's a lot in it. It's not just the sites. There's a lot that can speak to resident protection style policies, and I think we might have an even housing trust fund if we're going to set up different types of programs to make ADU construction easier here. I mean, those are a lot of things that I'm hearing other cities kind of grapple with, like how they might actually facilitate how that works. So would be interested to know what you're thinking. And it tends to be just kind of rushed where the draft text goes up and then it gets approved like 5 days later. And I'd like to disrupt that if possible and have some of those sections be considered. And so maybe that's you talking to Deanna, but
Yeah, and I'd be happy to connect as well on that if you'd like.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I want to follow your lead, and we want to make sure that there's opportunities for us to do some of the things that may not be that expensive, but that may actually have a big impact in making some of our policies successful.
Mhm. Yeah,
Sure.
and I want to put in a plug for when we do get a staff report related to this, like, for example, the site strategies. We got the staff report on Thursday evening, which was 72 hours as per the law, but 48 hours of those were a weekend. So there was very little opportunity to clarify our understanding. And so it would be nice to have a few more weekdays of study time for the policies meeting in particular.
And I'm always happy to receive feedback, so please share that with me. And I will
Mm,
be sure it gets delivered to the, I don't know what's going on with my
Okay.
sound here.
Anyway, so that's okay, Mike. We will, I'm going to move to adjourn the meeting unless there's anything else. Last call for anything else? Okay. All right. 8:47.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody.